The whisper lingered in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Don't let me go alone," she had said, her voice barely audible in the dimly lit office. His response, "So, where do I sleep?" would change everything for single father James Collins and his intimidating boss, Victoria Hayes. If you're enjoying this story of unexpected connection and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories that remind us love can find us in the most surprising places. James Collins stared at the blinking cursor on his computer screen, the numbers blurring before his tired eyes. It was nearly 9 p.m., and he was the last one left in the office, or so he thought. The soft click of heels against marble flooring made him look up. Victoria Hayes, CEO of Hayes Publishing and his direct superior, stood in the doorway of his cubicle. Her usual perfect posture seemed slightly diminished, her shoulders carrying an invisible weight. Her dark hair was pulled back in its customary tight bun, but a few strands had escaped, softening her typically severe appearance. "You're still here, Collins?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. James nodded, gesturing to the spreadsheets on his screen. "Quarterly reports. I promised I'd have them ready for tomorrow's meeting." Victoria's eyes, usually calculating and cold, held something different tonight, something vulnerable that made James sit up straighter. "The Tokyo conference starts Monday," she said, seemingly changing the subject. "I leave Saturday morning." "I know. I finalized your itinerary yesterday." James had been her executive assistant for 8 months now, a job he'd taken out of desperation after his wife walked out, leaving him with their 5-year-old daughter, Emma. The pay was excellent, the hours brutal, but it kept a roof over their heads and paid for Emma's asthma medication. Victoria stepped into his cubicle, something she never did. "My assistant for the Asian branch just called in. Family emergency. He won't be able to accompany me." James nodded, waiting for her to continue, wondering why she was telling him this at 9 p.m. instead of sending an email like she normally would. "I need someone who knows my schedule, my preferences, how I operate." She paused, her fingers fidgeting with the sleeve of her tailored blazer. "I need you to come with me." James felt his heart sink. "Ms. Hayes, I can't. My daughter." "Double pay, all expenses covered, and a bonus when we return," she interrupted, her business voice returning. "It's a week, Collins. Surely you can find someone to watch your daughter for a week." James thought of Emma, of her small face lighting up every morning when he made her dinosaur-shaped pancakes, of her nightly ritual of having him check under the bed for monsters. A week was an eternity in the eyes of a 5-year-old. "I'm sorry, but I can't leave Emma. She's only 5, and it's just the two of us." Something flickered across Victoria's face, disappointment, yes, but something else too. For a brief moment, James thought it might be fear. "I understand," she said stiffly, turning to leave. James watched her walk away, her shoulders slightly hunched. It was so unlike her usual commanding presence that he found himself calling after her. "Ms. Hayes? Is everything all right?" She stopped but didn't turn around. "Perfectly fine, Collins. Get those reports done before you leave." But there was something in her voice that told him everything was not fine. Victoria Hayes, the woman known in publishing circles as the Ice Queen, the woman who had built her father's failing publishing house into a global empire, the woman who made seasoned executives quake in their Italian leather shoes, that woman sounded afraid. Before he could think better of it, James was on his feet and following her to her office. Victoria's office was a testament to her success, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, minimalist furniture in shades of white and gray, awards and accolades displayed tastefully on floating shelves. She was standing by the window, her back to the door, when James knocked softly. "What is it, Collins?" she asked without turning. "The truth," he said simply. "Something's wrong, and it has to do with this Tokyo trip." Victoria turned slowly, her face a careful mask. "That's presumptuous of you." "Maybe," James agreed, stepping into the office. But I've worked for you long enough to know when something's off. You've never personally asked me to stay late. You've never come to my cubicle. And you've certainly never looked worried. For a long moment, Victoria said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to deflate her entire being, she gestured to one of the chairs across from her desk. James sat, and to his surprise, instead of taking her place in the imposing chair behind the desk, Victoria sat in the chair beside him. "I hate flying," she said quietly. "Terrified, actually. Ironic for someone who travels as much as I do." James blinked in surprise. "I had no idea. No one does. I've managed to hide it for years. My father knew. He used to accompany me on all my business trips when I first took over the company. After he died, my assistant, Richard, took over that role. He didn't just handle my schedule, he helped me through the panic attacks, made sure I took my medication, kept me distracted during takeoff and landing. And now Richard is retiring," James said, understanding dawning. Victoria nodded. "Next month. This is his last trip with me, but now he can't make it." She looked up, meeting James's eyes directly. "I can't do it alone, Collins. I've tried. It doesn't end well." The vulnerability in her admission struck James deeply. Here was a woman who projected nothing but strength and confidence, admitting to a fear so profound it could potentially derail her career. "What about someone else from the executive team?" he suggested. Victoria's laugh was hollow. "And let them see me weak? I'd lose all respect. You know how this industry works." She was right. The publishing world, like many others, was still largely dominated by men who would view any sign of vulnerability as weakness, especially from a woman. "Why me, then?" James asked. Victoria's gaze was steady now. "Because you're competent. Discreet. And because you've never looked at me the way the others do, either afraid or like they're trying to figure out how to take my job." James considered her words. It was true, he'd always viewed Victoria as just his boss, someone he worked for, not someone to fear or undermine. His focus had been on doing his job well enough to keep it, to provide for Emma. "I can't leave my daughter," he repeated, but his resolve was weakening. "Bring her," Victoria said suddenly. James stared at her. "What? Bring your daughter. We'll arrange for a nanny during the meetings, but otherwise, she can come with us. Hayes Publishing has a suite at the hotel in Tokyo. There's plenty of room." The offer was unexpected and uncharacteristically generous. James studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motives, but found only sincerity, and that same undercurrent of fear. "Why is this conference so important?" he asked. "Important enough to bring a 5-year-old halfway around the world?" Victoria stood and walked back to the window, her silhouette sharp against the city lights. "Because if I don't secure this deal with Tanaka Publishing, we lose our foothold in the Asian market. If that happens, the board has made it clear they'll be reconsidering leadership positions." "They'd fire you? After everything you've done for this company?" "Business isn't sentimental, Collins. Results are all that matter." James thought about it. The idea was crazy, taking Emma to Tokyo, working closely with the woman known for making assistants cry on a regular basis, potentially witnessing his formidable boss at her most vulnerable. But then he thought about his own situation, the mounting medical bills, the school he wanted to enroll Emma in next year, the repairs his apartment desperately needed. Double pay, all expenses, and a bonus, he repeated her earlier offer. Victoria turned, a hint of hope in her eyes. "Yes. And Emma comes with us, with appropriate childcare arranged during working hours." "Of course." James took a deep breath. "One more condition." Victoria raised an eyebrow, waiting. "If I'm going to help you through panic attacks and see you at your most vulnerable, I think you should call me James, not Collins. A small smile, the first genuine one he'd ever seen from her, curved Victoria's lips. Agreed. James. As he stood to leave, Victoria's voice stopped him, softer than he'd ever heard it. Don't let me go alone, she whispered, the words seeming to cost her greatly. James looked back at this powerful woman who suddenly seemed so human, so real, and found himself saying words he never expected to say to Victoria Hayes. So, where do I sleep? The next 48 hours passed in a whirlwind of preparation. James had to explain to Emma that they were going on an adventure to Japan, arrange for her medication, pack appropriate clothing for both of them, and brief his elderly neighbor Mrs. Patel, who would be watching their cat, Mr. Whiskers. Emma, thankfully, was thrilled at the prospect of flying on an airplane and seeing Tokyo. Her excitement helped ease James's anxiety about the trip, though he still worried about how she would handle the long flight and time change. Victoria, meanwhile, had been uncharacteristically accommodating. She'd arranged for a car service to pick them up, booked them first-class tickets, with James seated beside her and Emma across the aisle, and even sent over a package of travel activities for Emma. Saturday morning arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle. James stood in their small apartment, doing a final check of their luggage while Emma bounced excitedly on the sofa in her favorite unicorn pajamas. "Daddy, will we see real samurai in Tokyo?" she asked, her dark curls bouncing with each jump. "Probably not real ones, sweetie. But maybe we'll see some samurai costumes in a museum," he replied, zipping up her small pink suitcase. "And can we eat sushi? Lucy at school says sushi is raw fish, and that's gross, but I want to try it anyway." James smiled at his daughter's adventurous spirit. "We can definitely try sushi. But there are lots of kinds, some have cooked fish or just vegetables." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. James opened it to find Victoria standing there, dressed more casually than he'd ever seen her in dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, and a tailored trench coat. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, making her look younger and more approachable. "Good morning," she said, her eyes moving past him to Emma, who had stopped jumping and was now staring at the stranger with undisguised curiosity. "You must be Emma," Victoria said, her voice gentler than James had ever heard it. "I'm Victoria. I work with your dad." Emma slid off the couch and approached, studying Victoria with the frank assessment only children can get away with. "You're pretty," she declared finally. "Daddy, you didn't say your boss was pretty." James felt heat rise to his face. "Emma." But Victoria laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed her face. "Thank you, Emma. I think you're pretty too. I like your unicorn pajamas." Emma beamed. "They're my favorite. Unicorns are magical, you know." "So I've heard," Victoria replied seriously. "Are you excited about our trip to Tokyo?" As Emma launched into an enthusiastic list of all the things she wanted to see and do in Japan, James watched the interaction with amazement. Victoria Hayes, the woman who reduced marketing executives to stammering messes, was crouched down at eye level with his daughter, listening intently to a 5-year-old's thoughts on Hello Kitty and cherry blossoms. It was the first glimpse of a side of Victoria he'd never imagined existed, and it made him wonder what other surprises this trip might hold. The car ride to JFK was uneventful, with Emma chattering excitedly from her booster seat while Victoria answered her questions with surprising patience. James observed the interaction quietly, still trying to reconcile this version of his boss with the intimidating figure who stalked the halls of Hayes Publishing. It wasn't until they reached the airport that James began to notice signs of Victoria's anxiety. Her responses to Emma became shorter, her posture more rigid, and her eyes darted frequently to the departure boards. As they checked in and made their way through security, Victoria's breathing became more shallow. By the time they reached the first-class lounge, her hands were visibly trembling as she handed over her boarding pass. "Emma, would you like to pick out some snacks for the flight?" James asked, nodding toward the buffet area of the lounge. Once Emma was happily examining the pastry selection, he turned to Victoria. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Victoria's laugh was brittle. "Not remotely. But I'll manage." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small pill bottle. "Anxiety medication. It helps, but it doesn't eliminate the fear entirely." James nodded. "What else can I do?" Victoria looked at him, surprise evident in her expression. Perhaps she wasn't used to direct offers of help. "Distraction helps. Conversation. Anything to keep my mind off the fact that we'll be in a metal tube hurtling through the sky at 600 miles per hour." "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds perfectly reasonable to be terrified," James said with a small smile. That earned him a weak laugh from Victoria. "Not helping, Collins." "James," he reminded her gently. "James," she corrected herself, and something in the way she said his name made his heart beat a little faster. Emma returned with a plate piled high with pastries, effectively ending their conversation. But as they sat waiting for their flight to be called, James noticed Victoria's gaze frequently resting on Emma, a softness in her expression that he'd never seen before. When boarding was announced, Victoria took a deep breath and swallowed one of her pills with the last of her water. As they walked toward the gate, Emma unexpectedly slipped her small hand into Victoria's. "Don't worry," Emma said solemnly, looking up at Victoria. "Daddy says airplanes are super safe. Safer than cars, even. And I'll hold your hand if you get scared." Victoria looked down at the little girl, momentarily speechless. Then, with a smile that transformed her entire face, she squeezed Emma's hand gently. "Thank you, Emma. That's very brave of you." As they boarded the plane, James watched his daughter chattering away to Victoria, pointing out everything she found interesting, from the uniforms of the flight attendants to the buttons on the first-class seats. And he watched Victoria, her focus entirely on Emma, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly as she engaged with the child's endless curiosity. It was during takeoff that James truly understood the depth of Victoria's fear. As the engines roared and the plane began its acceleration down the runway, her face went pale, and her knuckles turned white as she gripped the armrests. Without thinking, James reached over and placed his hand over hers. "Look at Emma," he said softly, nodding toward his daughter across the aisle, who was pressing her face against the window in delight as the ground fell away beneath them. "See how exciting this is for her. Try to see it through her eyes." Victoria's gaze shifted to Emma, and some of the panic in her expression eased. She didn't pull her hand away from James's, and he didn't move it until the plane had leveled off and the seatbelt sign was turned off. "Thank you," she said quietly once the worst had passed. "That helped." James nodded, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment had been. "Happy to help. That's why I'm here, right?" Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, disappointment, perhaps, but she nodded and turned her attention to her tablet, effectively ending the conversation. The flight was long, but Emma proved to be an excellent traveler, dividing her time between watching movies, coloring in the activity books Victoria had provided, and napping. During one of Emma's naps, Victoria surprised James by asking about his life before Hayes Publishing. "You were a journalist, right? Before you became an assistant?" James nodded, surprised she knew this detail from his resume. "Environmental reporter for the Tribune. I loved it, but when the paper downsized, I was one of the first to go. New hires, no seniority." "And your wife?" Victoria asked, then immediately looked like she regretted the question. "I'm sorry, that's personal." "You don't have to." "It's fine," James assured her. "Lisa left about a year after I lost my job at the Tribune. Said she'd never signed up to be married to a failure. She moved to California with her yoga instructor. Calls Emma on her birthday and Christmas, but that's about it." Victoria's expression hardened. "She sounds charming." James shrugged. "It was hard at first, but honestly, we're better off. Emma Deeser."